are very, very bad for this. They will spot the exploits in the system, you know, and they'll break it. They'll think, okay, well, here's how I can achieve the extrinsic reward without having to do the activity that I'm supposed to do. There's a certain amount of elation from having successfully won the game, in effect, but it's not necessarily a very useful thing if you want people to actually get better at their skills or their job. This tendency to only do enough work to get the reward. There's been a very recent interesting setup on the effects of praise as a reward. If you tell somebody you're very clever, that will tend to be a demotivator again. So it's very like having a monetary reward. If you have a bunch of children doing a puzzle, if you tell them they're clever, they won't try new things. They'll do puzzles that are within their capability. If you tell them you worked very hard there, I'm impressed with how hard you worked, they're willing to try out new things. This comes up with this, the framing mechanisms part of my paper is about instilling a game attitude in children and anyone going into education, so they're willing to try out new things because they're not scared of failing. You know, game for anything, that kind of concept of the word game, but closely related to the noun game. Extrinsic motivators tend to reduce creativity in anyone doing a you know, artistic role, you know, writing, anything like that. If they're only focused on getting the pay at the end of it, they tend to produce worse work, you know, in terms of creativity, artistic quality, that kind of thing. Over-justification effect comes up in psychology. Basically, if you offer people an extrinsic reward for a certain amount of time and then take it away, you massively demotivate them, even more so than the original offer of the extrinsic reward. So if you're offering children points and levels or grades for learning, and then say, oh no, now we want you to go to university, you know, we want you to motivate yourselves, they don't do it. They find it very, very hard to do. Short time? Yeah. Sure. Okay. Yeah, as I say, even praise can be an extrinsic motivator. I'll zip through these next bits. Determining the most effective approach for each subject. This concept of identity comes up a lot in the work of James Paul G., American psycholinguistics professor. He regards it as an absolutely necessary part of learning to take on new identities. This is why, you know, if you want to teach children science, you teach them by getting Bunsen burners and test tubes out rather than reading books. Historian, you know, you want them to analyse the primary sources rather than just teaching them dates. Fireman and dispatcher, there's been a lot of work recently in schools in kind of basically turning the class into a big role-playing game. You know, it's almost like a play approach. This last one is absolutely vital. Teacher, I touched on this earlier, being able to teach somebody one's own skills. It's a new identity. All these new identities can help one to literally identify with a whole new peer group. You know, in this case, in this room, it's that identity as an academic, which a lot of us are sort of moving towards taking whatever other identities we take on in our lives. And without taking on that new identity, it's very, very hard to be motivated to do whatever the learning task is. So yeah, skills that can be mastered by other means rather than direct teaching. The literacy one I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of very effective research on having children tell stories and then write down stories, and then they're more motivated to learn grammar because it makes their stories better and the other children are praising them more, teachers more happy with it. Yeah, I've pretty much covered that already. We're very receptive to direct learning. When we've got a practical use for the skill already, you're more willing to pick up that book on sailing for dummies if you've already been on a sailboat and got the book and want to learn. This one's tricky still, student skill level. The easiest approach with this, or the most effective approach we've worked so far, is probably a company, not-for-profit company in the US called the Khan Academy. They teach maths predominantly, and it's very possible to look on YouTube, look at their maths tutorials, and start at any level whatsoever, and learn the next level. So how this applies to school, the children learn from video tutorials at home, and then they get tested in school. So it's almost a reverse to the usual homework approach. They have as much time as they need to learn this new skill. So the bright kids can spend 5 minutes, watch the video once, okay, I can do that, no problem at all. The ones who are struggling a bit more can keep going and still be able to succeed at the test in the school the following day. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So any questions?
Thank you for your talk. I think there are a lot of questions. Yes, please.
Yeah. Where are you going to take this?
I'm going to take it predominantly not in that education route, as I say. It's going to be, I've got a plan to study 3 different gaming communities or 3 different styles of game and see how people why people are motivated to play them and whether the rewards that they get out of those have a demotivating effect or not. But yeah, I'm still at a fairly early stage yet, so I'm not ironed out the precise nature of it, but within the next month or so I will be doing it.
Yeah, Ian, do you think that you need the technology for this? That you need games for this? Or do you think that all what you have said, that all could be applied without technology as well?
It could be. I mean, technology
with
can
good
make,
teachers.
Potentially. I think it's much harder without the addition of technology. You know, technology certainly makes that last part, the adjusting the challenge, it makes it much easier. But again, if you have a really good teacher who knows a lot of this stuff, because teachers don't often, you know, they don't research psychology as well, they don't necessarily research gaming, etc., etc. But a great teacher would be having the children work cooperatively and having them teach each other, so the better students are helping the worse ones. I mean, again, I know that's done in some schools already on the game side. And you can do the story game stuff, it's a previous one, isn't it? The one that I mentioned in the paper is actually a tabletop role-playing game that was used by one teacher, and he had incredibly good results with it. There's no technology involved whatsoever with them when they write their stories on a word processor later, you know. But yeah, I'm thinking about games in general rather than just video games. I think there are some positive aspects of game-likeness, if you like, which aren't necessarily about the experience of motivators, they're about that experience of the flow state, which is why we play games anyway. One of those central human drives is mastery over something. It could be mastery over the environment in sailing. It could be mastery over an opponent in games or a computer related. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily need games as such. It's just children do play games. You know, they play. I think it's along the lines of an average of about 10 to 15 hours a week. And obviously, some of them play a lot more. And games are inherently much more engaging. There's this concept of a juicy interface that people mentioned, that when you play a game, you get this immediate feedback. You know, you get flashing lights and pretty colours and sound effects, and the feedback is out of proportion for what you've done. And so it's very, very difficult to go from that into a school environment where the feedback is, you know, once a week the teacher marks your work with a tick or an X. So yeah, there are some aspects of games that I think, if schools are going to compete with games for children's attention, then we have to probably throw some games in there, but they have to be good games as well. You know, a lot of educational games fail on the good games front as well.
You have time for one last question and a short answer.
Sure, sorry.
Martin?
Oh, which one do I choose now? 10 questions.
You mentioned the example of how games may motivate. And you mentioned the avatar dies, you can start again, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
You mentioned the thing, well, you learn something, you probably haven't reached a level, you can go back to the level again and again and again. You may even try that at home. You said, you just play the game or the video game or whatever at home. I'm wondering what would happen, let's say, if you're stuck at that level or you're stuck at that ability and you don't pass. I remember being a kid playing video games that quite often I was fascinated by a game, but after failing that same level again and again and again,
You got bored.
I not even bored, I got annoyed, frustrated, I wouldn't touch it again.
Sure, yeah.
So probably I wasn't very good at it, and then this motivation, whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic, is disappearing. Is that a danger?
It is a danger. I mean, there are ways around it. Because I remember the same experiences. You know, I grew up in the 70s. I had a Commodore PET with Space Invaders on. But let's see. Having my favourite approach now, if I'm playing a video game and I'm stuck, I ask my son, and he helps. You know, and I think as an adult, generally that's the best approach. Is ask a child, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, it's easy. You know, just go do this." And there's nothing wrong with asking for help. You know, that's one of the big things to take home from this: is work cooperatively rather than individually. These days, you can get help with online communities. You know, acquiring an identity as a gamer, and maybe to some extent now as a game designer and as a game modifier. You know, there's a whole big modifying community out there that is very accepting of new people and willing to give people feedback and help them learn to do things more. So, Yeah, there's a lot more resources out there now than back in the day when it was maybe you on a console, you know, with nobody else to talk to about the game, just get stuck and throwing it out the window of frustration.
Okay, surely there are more questions.
No,
I
much more.
propose to move the discussion into the coffee break, and thanks again to the